In Formula 1, there are two types of champions. On one hand, we have perennial winners like Schumacher, Hamilton, Fangio, Prost, and 11 others who have etched their names in history by clinching multiple championships. Then there are solitary victors, those one-shot wonders who tasted glory just once in their careers. But who are these lone season conquerors, and why do they fail to win another title? Here are 15 one-time F1 champions and their stories. Nicknamed the Gentleman of Turin, Giuseppe Farina's path had always been intertwined with the automotive world. His father, Giovanni, owned a bodywork shop, while his uncle founded Pininfarina, a coach-building firm that designed sleek Italian cars. But it wasn't until the roar of engines echoed through the Aosta Grand San Bernardo hill climb of 1925 that Farina's own racing story was ignited. Chasing not just victory, but also his father who was competing in the race, Farina throttled his Alfa Romeo like a beast on steroids. Unfortunately, his race was cut short by a nasty accident, which left him with a broken shoulder and a few cuts on his face. This would set the stage for his tenacious career as a professional racer. Although his racing ambition was momentarily put on hold by World War II, he was back as soon as the coast was clear. Despite the protests from his wife, Elsa Giaretto, who hated racing, Farina was determined to pursue his ambition of becoming a legendary racer, and the Formula 1 World Championship in 1950 allowed him to do just that. Though not the most gifted, Farina's determination and aggression made him a tough competitor on the track. And with the strength of the Alfa Romeo Tipo 158 car, the Italian racer was unstoppable. Farina won the first Grand Prix at Silverstone before adding 2 more victories in Switzerland and Italy to clinch the title ahead of his teammate Juan Manuel Fangio. This achievement sealed Farina's iconic status as the first ever winner of a Formula 1 championship. But ultimately, he couldn't defend it as he was beaten to the 1951 F1 title by Fangio. In search of more glory, he joined Ferrari in 1952, but the union didn't yield much success. So, in 1955, with the twilight of his racing career approaching, Farina reluctantly bid farewell to the track that had been both his playground and his battlefield. Exactly 8 years after Farina won his first and only F1 title, Mike Hawthorn would go on to repeat the same feat, but this time with a different team. Born into racing heritage, Mike was a different breed among drivers of his era. He had a weird camaraderie about him which oozed confidence. His journey to winning a world championship began at a club racing event in 1952. Despite competing against seasoned racers like Manuel Fangio and Frolian Gonzalez, Mike steered his Formula 2 Cooper Bristol to victory. He followed up with another win at the Formula Libre race. On the back of these consecutive wins, Mike entered his Cooper for the remainder of the 1952 F1 season, and he impressed seriously, capturing the attention of fans and, more importantly, the legendary Enzo Ferrari, who signed him up for the 1953 season. After claiming his first race victory at the French Grand Prix, Mike was in tears at the British anthem God Save the Queen, played in the background. But ultimately, he had to wait 5 years before winning the championship in 1958. He became the first ever British champion in Formula 1 history. However, rather than chase more titles, he announced his retirement from the sport. Apparently, he had fallen in love with a damsel named Jean Howarth and no longer had the heart for racing. Like Mike Hawthorn, Phil Hill is another Ferrari driver who became a one-time champion, but his path to F1 greatness was very much different. He lived a troubled life and suffered from an inferiority complex, which ultimately transcended into his racing career. He was always worried sick about his safety before every race, and more often than not, his anxieties were laid bare for everyone to see. This meant he never truly felt the joy of racing, yet he loved it so much he wouldn't dare to quit. "Racing brings out the worst in me," Hill said in an interview. "Without it, I don't know what kind of person I might have become, but I'm not sure I like the person I am now. Racing makes me selfish, irritable, defensive. If I could get out of this sport with any ego left, I would." For his sole championship win, which came in 1961, Hill went head-to-head against German teammate Von Trips. After months of hard racing, the fight for the title came down to a fierce showdown at Monza. Hill would go on to win the race and consequently the title, but the taste of that victory left a sour taste in his mouth. During the race, Von Trips locked wheels with the Lotus of Jim Clark, and both drivers spun into the crowd, killing 15, including Von Trips, and 14 spectators. So, in other words, Hill won the title over his deceased teammate. The American driver would race for 2 other teams before retiring in 1964, the same year that John Surtees, another Ferrari driver, won his first and only F1 title. Remarkably, John Surtees remains the only man in history to win a motorcycle and car racing championship. In 1979, Jody Scheckter, an erratic and crash-prone racer, became the 4th Ferrari one-time Formula One champion. Denny Hulme was introduced to driving at an early age. He reportedly started driving trucks at the age of 6, and by the time he was 17, he dropped out of school to work as a truck driver and mechanic. After competing in different local races, Denny's racing career was halted due to lack of funds. But as fate would have it, he got a job with Jack Brabham. Seeing that his new employee had a knack for racing, Brabham allowed Denny to take rides in his sports car and single-seaters. Denny took full advantage of this rare opportunity, winning multiple junior races in 1963 and the F2 Series in 1964. In 1965, the duo moved up to Formula One, and by 1966 they had won the championship, with Brabham claiming the prize and Denny winning 4 podiums. One season later, it was Denny's turn to shine. He won at Monaco in Germany and claimed 6 podium finishes to win the 1967 title ahead of Brabham. Fast forward to 1968, Denny joined forces with Bruce McLaren. However, the partnership was not productive and he failed to win another championship before he retired in 1974. Denny later passed on in 1992 after suffering a heart attack while driving at the Bathurst 1000 competition in Australia. But despite the oddity of this tragic event, Denny Hulme isn't the only one-shot F1 champion to die on the track. In the year 1970, a certain Austrian driver named Jochen Rindt died during a race and still won the championship. After his forays in motor racing, Rindt was signed by Lotus in 1969 to be paired with the reigning world champion at the time, Graham Hill. Rindt wasted no time in establishing himself as a force to be reckoned with. He spent the 1969 season studying the car, and by 1970 he was ready to challenge. Rindt pulled off one of the greatest races in motorsports history at Monaco, using his less fancied Lotus to edge out Jack Brabham. The Austrian racer enjoyed this victory so much that he burst into tears during the medal presentation. However, on the 5th of September 1970, tragedy struck. Rindt lost control of his car and plunged into a guardrail during practice at Monza. Coincidentally, the spot where he died is just about a few meters away from the exact place where his idol, Von Trips, also died. But despite passing away 1 month before the final race, Rindt would go on to win the 1970 title, becoming the first, and so far the only, posthumous champion of the competition. James Hunt was always on the edge, both on and off the track. He lived a flamboyant lifestyle and was known as the man who had more girlfriends than mechanics. But despite these distractions, Hunt was a true racer with a knack for carefree driving. He carried this aggressive racing style like a chip on his shoulder, and sure enough, it followed him all the way into Formula One. After an uneventful season with Hesketh Racing in 1974, Hunt was out of job. Fortunately, Emerson Fittipaldi's exit left a vacant seat at McLaren, and Hunt was back doing what he loves to do best. 2 years later, in 1976, he'd be in the running for the title against Ferrari's Niki Lauda. The rivalry went up until the last race in Japan. To the amazement of everyone, Lauda parked his Ferrari mid-race due to a heavy downpour. With his main rival out of contention, Hunt continued racing and finished third to win the title. Sadly, Hunt lost his enthusiasm for racing and eventually retired midway through the 1979 season due to self-preservation. Now, before he became a professional racer, Mario Andretti was a true race fan. However, he never really thought of becoming a Formula 1 champion until the 1954 Italian Grand Prix, where he was captivated by the mastery of drivers like Juan Manuel Fangio and Alberto Ascari. In 1955, Andretti's family moved to America, where he'd eventually start his racing career. He competed in a series of low and high-profile racing events before making his F1 debut for Lotus in 1968. Unwilling to commit full-time to Lotus, Andretti continued to compete in different racing events in America until 1971, when he finally gave in. From then on, he showed his exceptional qualities on the track, winning a few races for Lotus despite competing in unreliable cars. However, the introduction of the Lotus 79, 7 years later, proved to be a game changer. Competing in this innovative machine, Mario Andretti won 6 races to claim the only title of his exciting Formula 1 career. He spent 2 more seasons at Alfa Romeo before returning to the US, where he participated in other racing events. In 1982, Andretti was invited by Enzo Ferrari to race for the Prancing Horse team at Monza as a guest driver, and he definitely made the most of it. After qualifying on pole, Andretti steered his Ferrari 126 Turbo past the finish line in P3. It was almost as if he never left the sport. Unfortunately, this would be his last competitive drive on a Formula 1 circuit. However, that solitary F1 title in 1978 and his stellar achievements across other motorsports competitions means he's regarded as one of the greatest race car drivers ever. Now, after trying to bankroll his racing career without success, Alan Jones received a sponsored ride in F3 by GRD in 1970. But his big break wouldn't come until the year 1978, when he received an offer from Ferrari, or so he thought. In a shocking twist of events, Ferrari retracted their offer and Alan Jones would end up at Williams. 2 years later, he steered his FW07B to victories in Argentina, France, Britain, Canada and the United States, en route to winning his first title, which also turned out to be his last. In 1981, Alan Jones was in the title mix with 2 race victories, but he could only finish 3rd. So, at the end of the campaign, he returned to become a full-time farmer. In 1984, Jones made a sensational return to the tracks with Arrows, but it didn't work out. He tried again 2 years later with the Beatrice Formula 1 team, and the outcome was just about the same. Initially, Keke Rosberg's dream was to either become a dentist or a programmer, but after mistakenly crashing his dad's car into the garage door as a toddler, it appeared that fate had other plans for him. Shortly after this incident, Keke got involved in karting, winning the Finnish Kart Championship 5 times, as well as the Scandinavian and European Championships in 1973. Exactly 5 years later, he made his F1 debut with the Theodore team. He'd later go on to race for ATS, Wolf and Fittipaldi, but none of these teams were as competitive as he'd have liked. Fast forward to 1980, his racing career would take a different turn for the better. Following Alan Jones's sudden retirement, Frank Williams was left searching for a last-minute replacement, and it turned out to be Keke Rosberg. 2 years into his time at Williams, Keke hit his peak, winning the 1982 Drivers' Championship. Surprisingly, the Swedish-born driver won only 1 race, but he picked up enough points across the season to win the first and only F1 title of his career. Known for his tenacious driving style, Nigel Mansell was an interesting character in the grid. Every single time he got on the track, he gave his optimum best, not caring if his competitors thought he was being too intense. As a matter of fact, by the time Mansell called time on his F1 career, he had racked up more crashes than wins. Nevertheless, he remains one of the most iconic drivers in the history of the sport. After testing his daredevil stint in kart racing, which saw him race with a broken neck, Mansell sold off his car to fund his Formula 3 career. And even though he became notorious for appearing in the headlines for the wrong reasons, Mansell was offered a test seat with Lotus's F1 team in 1980. By 1989, he moved to Ferrari for a short stint before joining the Williams-Renault team, where he eventually won his first and only F1 title in 1992. On his way to winning the championship, Mansell was utterly dominant, winning 9 of the 16 races. Sadly, he had an infamous disagreement with the team that saw him abandon F1 for the IndyCar Racing Championship. Despite being a different terrain, Mansell won the IndyCar competition in 1993. He made a brief return to F1 to drive for Williams and McLaren, but he was unable to win another title. Now, when Damon Hill joined Williams in 1993, he was one of the least fancied drivers on the entire grid. At the time, Damon's biggest achievement in the sport was 2 Grand Prix starts and the fact that his father, Graham Hill, was a 2-time world champion. Nevertheless, Damon was keen to make the most of the opportunity before him. In his first season with Williams, he won 3 races and finished 3rd in the Drivers' Championship as teammate Alain Prost coasted to the title. Following Prost's retirement from the sport, Ayrton Senna was brought in to pair with Damon Hill, but the partnership was short-lived as Senna died in his 3rd race for the team, meaning Damon was left with the responsibility of carrying the team. And he took on the challenge without complaint. In 1994, he lost the title by a single point to Michael Schumacher after a nasty crash between both drivers in the final race. 1 year later, he finished 2nd yet again to Schumacher, with many criticising him for not utilising the full strength of the car. Damon responded brilliantly to these criticisms by winning 8 out of the 16 races the next season to clinch the 1996 drivers' title in style. But rather than build upon this success to challenge for more titles, Williams decided not to renew Hill's contract because the British driver was demanding 5 times more than his 1995 salary to continue with the team. Although Damon never publicly addressed the issue, his wife Georgie Hill couldn't help but give the Williams team a piece of her mind. Damon has proved himself to have more integrity and dignity in his little finger than most people have got in their whole body, she said. Hill joined the Arrows in 1997 before moving to Jordan 1 year later, but with no realistic chance of winning another title, he called time on his career after the 1999 season. At the 1982 Belgium Grand Prix, Jacques Villeneuve watched on when his father Gilles Villeneuve died during practice. Despite this tragic incident, he chose to compete in the very same sport that killed his father. As a youth racer, Villeneuve's record was blistering as he conquered the international ranks from the F3 Championship in Europe and Japan to the Atlantic and Indy cars in North America. So it was expected that Jacques would someday make the step up to F1 and perhaps win a couple of titles, and that's exactly what happened. Well, except he only ever won 1 title. Officially, his F1 career began in 1996 when he joined Williams. From his first day in the Williams garage, it was pretty obvious that Jacques was a man on a mission. In his debut race for the team, Villeneuve ran up against teammate Damon Hill very close to victory, but an oil leak problem meant he had to settle for 2nd place. Both men would continue to go head-to-head throughout the season. However, Hill managed to edge it, winning 5 races compared to Villeneuve's 4 to clinch the title. As the 1997 season came by, Villeneuve set his sights on the big prize, and this time he was never to be denied. He won 7 races to emerge champion ahead of the legendary Michael Schumacher. Villeneuve spent much of the rest of his career being at odds with the FIA. This also coincided with the lowest point of his career, where he became a journeyman, which saw him drive for Williams, the British-American racing team, Renault and Sauber before retiring in 2006. Now, Kimi Räikkönen stormed into Formula 1 on the back of one of the shortest and most successful youth racing careers in the history of the sport. He was quickly signed by the Sauber team ahead of the 2001 season, and despite being inexperienced, he produced some stellar performances with Sauber, which prompted McLaren to snap him up. The Finnish driver would go on to spend 5 years with the team, which were marred by unreliable cars and controversies around his personal life. Nonetheless, he won 9 podiums, finished 2nd in the Drivers' Championship in 2003 and 2004. This was just enough to earn him the most coveted seat on the grid. With Michael Schumacher bowing out, Räikkönen was signed by Ferrari. There were concerns at the time about Räikkönen's personality and whether he had what it takes to fill the shoes left behind a 7-time world champion. Despite all this, he wasn't bothered. 1 week before his debut, he was back home in Finland competing in a dangerous snowmobile race called James Hunt. He ended up winning the competition before jetting out to Australia for the season's opener. Raikkonen had a magical debut for Ferrari as he won the Australian Grand Prix from pole, and by the penultimate race he was ranked third in the standings behind Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton, who both raced for McLaren. Popularly called Iceman due to his calmness on and off the track, Raikkonen had it all to do in the final race in Brazil, and he didn't disappoint. He won the race in style to clinch the title by a single point. From then on, his form tailed off and he left Ferrari in 2009 to explore the World Rally Championship. In 2012, he returned to the sport with Lotus in pursuit of another title, which didn't materialise. Next up, Raikkonen made a blockbuster return to Ferrari and had a short stint with Alfa Romeo Racing, but he never really seemed to be able to recapture the magic he once had to become a champion again. Jenson Button's F1 career is nothing short of a family tale. His racing career started as a weekend hobby and ultimately went on to reach the pinnacle of the sport. His journey took him all the way to winning the coveted Drivers' Championship in 2009 with Brawn GP against all odds. In his very first F1 race, Jenson became the sport's youngest ever point scorer at the time. Williams were no doubt impressed by his performance, but they were already committed to another driver at the time. So they sent Jenson on a 2-season loan to Benetton Renault. It turned out to be a disaster, as Jenson was better known during this period for his extravagant lifestyle than his performances on the track. Benetton Renault would eventually release Jenson, and team boss Flavio Briatore made sure to highlight his grievances with the British driver, calling him a lazy playboy. After Jenson switched to the Bar Honda team for the 2003 season, his teammate Jacques Villeneuve said he looked more like a cute and smiley boy band member than an actual racer. Jenson, however, got the last laugh. He outperformed his more experienced teammate and finished third in the 2004 Drivers' Championship. But contractual issues and ineffective cars would keep him out of the limelight until 2009, when he did the impossible with the Brawn Mercedes team. He won 6 of the first 7 races and spent the rest of the season accumulating additional points as he clinched the first and only F1 title of his career. Considering the fact that Brawn Mercedes were a brand new team at the time, initially nobody thought they'd be anywhere near a front pack team, much less championship contenders. And that's why Jenson's championship win is regarded as one of the most iconic underdog victories in Formula One history. Now, 34 years on from when his father Keke Rosberg became a one-time F1 champion, Nico Rosberg would go on to achieve the same feat, albeit under different circumstances. In 2016, Rosberg was racing for Mercedes alongside Lewis Hamilton, his childhood buddy and one of the best drivers in the history of the sport. And while Hamilton was the undisputed #1 driver on the team, Rosberg had been firing warning shots that he just might be ready to challenge not only his teammate but the entire grid. And he made true of that promise, winning the first 4 races of the season. In the 5th race, the 2 Mercedes drivers collided in a dramatic twist of events that created bad blood between them. For a majority of the early season, Rosberg outperformed Hamilton, but the British driver put up an incredible performance in the business end of the campaign, winning 4 of the last 4 races before the grand finale at Abu Dhabi. At this point, Rosberg was ahead of Hamilton by a mere 5 points, and since they both had the same car, it was obvious that the best driver on the day would claim the title. And on that day in Abu Dhabi, it was Nico Rosberg. Rosberg shed tears of joy during the post-race celebration, as did his wife and parents. It was a surreal moment for the entire family, as Keke and Nico became only the second father and son in F1 to become champions. Surprisingly, Nico Rosberg retired just 5 days after winning the title, meaning just like his father, he too would become known as a one-time Formula One champion. Now, let us know in the comments below of any champions you'd like to see stories of, or any to add to this list. Thanks for watching, and to keep fantastic F1 stories coming, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.